I mean, the story, it sounds so familiar, right? A native band in BC claims that radar has identified the graves of murdered children. The CBC repeats the story from the band without checking it. The government lowers the flags in apology. And then the band shuts down communications, refuses to allow any further investigation into the alleged graves, despite having taken millions in tax dollars to do that very thing. Story sounds familiar? It's because the hoax is proving lucrative and the grifters won't change the narrative that works. It's been over 4 years since a band in Kamloops claimed they'd discovered the remains of over 200 murdered children in a field next to a former Indian residential school. So the federal government allocated $246 million to search for the bodies of children at former residential school sites. And the Kamloops band, well, they took $8 million of those dollars in funds and apparently didn't find a thing. I mean, they say they know the location of 200 bodies, but with $8 million to work with, they were incapable of taking a shovel and digging even one of those alleged graves up. It's a hoax. I'm going to say it outright, and the band knows it's a hoax. If they really believe there were children's bodies interred there, a forensic excavation would have begun within weeks of the discovery of the anomalies. The government's willing to give them millions of dollars without oversight, so why should they stop asking for more? And they are asking for more, by the way. They want $12 million now. The claim made in Sechelt, I'm probably mispronouncing it, BC. It's just up north of Vancouver. This is the new one. They're saying radar identified the graves of 81 children. When the Kamloops hoax was announced, it made international headlines. This is something that's kind of promising. The response to this latest hoax has been more muted. Only a few outlets have given it any coverage. This one didn't make any waves, really, aside from CBC, though, who dutifully called the radar anomalies unmarked graves. After a backlash over that inaccurate and inflammatory reporting, CBC reporter Alana Kelly actually deleted her posting on X where she said graves had been found, locked down her account. People are getting sick and tired of being fed this hoax, not to mention paying for it. Another grift being carried out by many Indigenous bands is to do GPR surveys over known cemeteries and then acting aghast when indications or graves are found. That was done in Groward, Alberta in 2022. It was reported that a possible mass grave site was there. The news faded away when it became clear that all they did was prove that a cemetery contained bodies. How much funding they got to establish this is unknown. Most burials on native reserves historically and even today, all they mark them with is wooden crosses, which deteriorate after a few years. They don't maintain the cemeteries. It's just the way it goes, and they get overgrown. It's common for cemeteries to have large sections of unmarked graves. It doesn't mean the bodies were surreptitiously buried there or there was foul play. Makes for great news copy, though, when these sites are discovered anew, aren't they? The reluctance to dig these sites proves the motivations of the activists to be fraudulent rather than genuine. In Winnipeg, activists lobbied to have tens of millions of dollars dedicated to digging up a local landfill to find the bodies of 2 murdered women suspected to be in there. It was claimed that burial for Indigenous people is sacred, and these bodies must be found and properly interred at any cost. Why then aren't the alleged bodies at the residential schools considered sacred? Why hasn't it become a priority to return these remains to the families? This exposes another part of the hoax. While it's alleged that hundreds of children were killed and buried at these residential school sites, there aren't any families to be found making the claims that their children disappeared. One would think at least a few would be kind of demanding to know where their children went. The schools also kept meticulous records of the students they needed to be in order to be reimbursed by the government. There's no records of vanishing children to be found. And guys, this was supposed to be happening in the 50s and 60s. Where did these alleged children come from? At a church site in Manitoba and a hospital site in Edmonton, activists made the error of actually, they believed their own soup, and excavated the alleged graves. And guess what? There was not a single body found, despite the oral history claiming they were there. Since those failures, Indigenous bands have learned not to excavate. They just do the radar surveys and demand more money. Speaking of oral history, the claims of the attendees of the Kamloops Residential School that they were forced to go out and dig graves in the night for their murdered classmates as recently as the 60s. If this is true, it's possible the perpetrators might still be alive to be prosecuted. If the RCMP believed any of this, there'd be excavations. Mass murders don't just remain uninvestigated. The RCMP knows there's no bodies to be found. It's a hoax. The child burial hoaxes at residential school sites have caused real hurt, though, and real social division. Also, over 100 churches have been vandalized or burned to the ground in response to this hoax, and hundreds of millions of dollars have been wasted. And this is only going to be continuing. This is going to keep continuing as long as the hoaxes are indulged rather than called out. It's time to take the shovels out and prove what's underground at these sites once and for all, no matter what the local band thinks. Guess what, guys? Indigenous bands aren't sovereign nations. They have no authority to block murder investigations, despite what they like to claim. That's a different hoax and for another column. In the meantime, let's get digging.